myth busting and maybe even a little myth confirming as we go through our program today. And best of all, we're going to meet some owls. My colleague Nicole Williams is also here, and she's going to be monitoring the chat. And if you have questions or comments, feel free to put them there, and Nicole will be happy to either answer them if it's a technical issue, or she can direct them to me, and we'll make sure that we get all of those answered. One note, just kind of housekeeping, we are recording today. Your cameras and microphones are not connected to this program, so you don't have to worry about anybody seeing you in your pajamas or eating your lunch while you enjoy our OWL program. But we are going to be sharing that link with teachers in case they want to share this program with their classrooms. So just a heads up about that. And let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be meeting, like I said, 3 birds today, and I also have 3 helpers that I will introduce when we get to that point in the program. Before we start busting some owl myths, I do want to talk to you just a tiny bit about HawkWatch International. In case you aren't familiar with us, we are a scientific nonprofit. We are headquartered in Salt Lake City, but we do work all across the Western United States and even globally. Our mission is to conserve the environment through education, long-term monitoring, and research on raptors as indicators of ecosystem health. And basically what that means is we study raptors because they give us a really good picture of their ecosystems and their environments. If we see a problem in the raptor population, it usually means there's a problem somewhere in the ecosystem. So we can kind of gauge the health of an entire area based on how raptors are doing. So if you would like to learn more about our work and what we do, you can head over to hawkwatch.org after the program. There's lots of information there. This program is part of the education piece of our mission, and we are planning to do these kind of virtual programs a couple times a month. And there's a range of topics, everything from like we're doing today, which is kind of an all ages family-friendly program, to like really technical science stuff. So there's something for everyone. Go ahead to our website and check out that schedule if you are interested in attending some more of these programs. So enough about that. Let's talk about owls. So our first slide today is just a picture of a little owl. Everybody probably went, oh, it's so cute, right? People love owls. Owls are more popular now than I think they've ever been, but they've always been fascinating to humans. And we have a lot of history and mythology and records that show that people have been watching owls for a long, long time. But why? Why are we so fascinated by owls? Well, we're going to explore that today as we bust or confirm some owl myths. And our first myth today is that owls are wise. We've probably all heard the expression, the wise old owl, or wise as an owl. In cartoons, owls are always like the smartest animal in the forest. But why? Why do we think owls are so wise? Well, one of the answers to that question lies in ancient history. So I want you to come meet one of my very favorite friends. Her name is Athena, and she is the Greek goddess of wisdom and war and heroes. Athena is one of the most famous goddesses from Greek mythology. A lot of people have heard of her and they know about her. And in fact, she has a little place in Greece you might have heard of, and that is Athens. The city of Athens is still there, still a thriving city in Greece. And it started out as a little village, and that was centuries ago. So the myth is that when Athens was a little tiny village, there was an oracle or someone who could see the future. And they predicted that this town, Athens, would become a mighty city that would be rich and powerful and take over the world. And so a lot of the gods on Mount Olympus wanted to be the ones that were the patron, or sort of the ruler over this city. And so there was a contest, and the 2 main contenders were Athena and Poseidon. And Poseidon was the god of the ocean. And you can kind of see the ocean way in the distance in this picture. Athens is close to the sea. So Athena and Poseidon decided they would have a contest, and each of them would present a gift to the mortal people of Athens. And whichever gift the mortals chose would mean that god would be in charge of the city. So Poseidon, he made a beautiful horse. It was strong and it was powerful, and people really liked it. It was an amazing awesome horse, like the best horse you've ever seen. Well, Athena, she made an olive tree. It wasn't as exciting as that horse, it wasn't as powerful or beautiful, but as people debated and talked about which of those gifts was better, they realized that the olive tree would live for centuries and it would provide the people of Athens with fruit and oil that they could use and medicine. They could plant those seeds and grow more trees. And so they realized that even though the horse was kind of the flashier, cooler gift in the present, the tree was the best gift for the long term. And that's the one they chose. And that was kind of signifying that they were wise, that they could think beyond today and consider tomorrow and make a good choice for the best gift. And so Athena became the patron goddess of Athens. Well, what does that have to do with owls? Turns out Athena has some friends. Athena's messengers were often portrayed as little owls. In fact, when you see ancient artwork of Athena and even modern artwork, she's often portrayed with an owl. She's the goddess of wisdom, so those owls became associated with wisdom too. And in fact, these owls were so associated with Athena that the money in Athens, there was a coin that had Athena's face on one side and this little owl on the other side. And you can see in this frieze from a statue that Athena has this little owl friend that she's talking to. Now, where would the Athenians get the idea that owls were associated with Athena? Well, it turns out these little owls are an actual species of owl that's found in Greece. This is a little owl. That's their common name. The scientific name is Athena noctura, which Athena refers to Athena, and noctura means night. So this is like Athena's little night owl. And you can see the map up in the corner shows their range. That green area is all the places they can be found. So they're across lots of Europe and parts of Asia and even parts of Africa. And they're a really common species of owl. And it turns out that little owls, unlike many species of raptors, are pretty tolerant of people. They don't seem to mind having people around. And in fact, they're cavity nesters. They like to nest in holes or little nooks and crannies. And it turns out those old stone buildings in Athens were full of places like that these owls like to nest in. And whenever there's people around, there's usually a lot of rodents around too that get attracted to the grain that people store. So these owls would live in these cities. They'd eat the mice that were attracted there by the grain that people were storing. And one of their favorite places to nest were in these ancient temples that were dedicated to Athena. So all these Greek citizens see these little owls go into the little nooks and crannies of the temple and then come flying out, and it kind of seemed like they were bearing messages or doing errands for Athena. So that's kind of one of the ways that owls became associated with wisdom. But are they really wise? That's going to be our next question. Well, one of the things that I think people really like about owls and that are really compelling is the way their eyes sit in their face. You can see they have these big, beautiful eyes, and they're right in the front of their face. And that's kind of how our eyes sit in our face as humans. So a lot of people look at owls and they can kind of see a reflection of themselves. They have a face that's a little bit human-like in the way its eyes are. But really, those eyes are very different from our human eyes. If I could take an owl and blow it up to a human size, as big as me, its eyeballs would be the size of softballs, about this big around. So imagine if I had two giant softball eyes on my face, they wouldn't even fit in my head. So owls take a lot of space in their heads for their eyes. And you can see from the skulls on this slide that that's the case. If you look at the one in the bottom left corner that has the dark background, you can see how big that eye socket is for this owl's eyes. Those eyes are actually kind of tube-shaped instead of being round like a ball, like ours are. And they're really deep and big so they can gather in a lot of light, because we all know owls typically like to hunt at nighttime. So having big eyes that can gather in light and help them see in the dark enables them to better hunt their prey. Now, on the skull on the right that has the blue background, you can see there's kind of a ring of bone around the eye socket, and that's missing from our skull in the bottom left. That's called a sclerotic ring. And that little ring of bone is actually there because those owl eyes are so big that they stick out past the edge of the eye sockets. So if there wasn't that sclerotic ring to hold them in, they'd kind of flop down. There wouldn't be enough support for them. So their eyes are held in place by these big bones. And what does that mean for their brains? Let's look at the skull on the bottom left again. And you can see that eye socket's so big, how much space is left in that head for a brain? It's not very much. So I don't want to say that owls aren't smart, because owls are actually really great at being owls. They have a brain that enables them to do all the things that an owl needs to do. They can find food, they can find a mate, they can raise babies, and that's really, what they need to do to survive, and they're great at doing that. But if I were to try and teach an owl to, say, fetch a stick like a dog, or to try and say a word like a parrot, an owl would not be able to learn those things. They're not really able to learn new behaviors. So when we think about animal intelligence, we have to think about animals like monkeys or parrots or crows or dolphins, and they tend to have much larger brains, and they can learn new and novel tasks and solve puzzles. So unfortunately, our owls, they're not capable of doing that. So when we say are owls wise, I think in terms of animal intelligence, probably not, but are they good at being owls? Yeah, they're really great at being owls. So I want to introduce you to one more Greek goddess. Her name is Artemis, and she is from the same family as Athena. They had the same dad, and Artemis is the goddess of the moon and the hunt. So she was a goddess that would travel the world by night and hunt by moonlight. And it seemed like the perfect name for one of our raptor ambassadors. So we have a little owl who we've named Artemis after this goddess of the moon. And we're going to meet her in just a minute. And my friend Avery is going to be the one that is handling Artemis. So let's go ahead and take a minute to meet her and hear her story.
All right, so this is Artemis. She is a Western Screech owl. And she came to us in 2014 after being hit by a car. So someone brought her to a rehabilitation center with an injured eye. You might be able to see her right eye looks a little bit different than her left. The pupil is dilated. And that eye was damaged when she was hit by the car. And because eyesight is so essential to owls' hunting style, she would not have been able to survive in the wild on her own if we were to rehabilitate her. She wouldn't have been able to hunt effectively. So because of that, HawkWatch was able to get a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service to keep her for educational purposes. And she's been here ever since. So we think she's around 10 years old, but we can't be entirely certain because she was an adult when she was injured. So Western Screech owls are found throughout the western United States. We have them here in Utah, and they live here year-round. They don't migrate. So you can see she has feathers going all the way down onto her toes to help keep her warm in the winter. And they like to nest in the hollows of trees, kind of similar to the little owls that Melissa was talking about earlier. They'll nest in hollows of cliffs. Sometimes you'll find them in urban areas. And they are nocturnal hunters, so they really rely on that eyesight to locate their prey. And they also rely on their specialized feathers to sneak up on that prey silently. So owls have really fluffy, soft feathers that are virtually silent when they fly, and that allows them to be great hunters. Screech owls will usually hunt on the edges of forested areas. They'll sit and wait for their prey and then drop down and take them by surprise from above. But they don't generally venture too far out into the open because they are pretty little and they can be prey to larger owls. They like to hunt a pretty wide variety of animals, so they'll eat insects, small rodents, small birds, reptiles, amphibians, even crayfish or small fish. So they can be adapted to quite a few different environments throughout the western United States. There are screech owls on the East Coast as well, and they have that more famous screech. Western screech owls tend to make more of a chatter or just a soft hooting sound, so they sound a little different than the typical screech owl. Let's see, do we have any questions?
Somebody wants to know how long they live. Is 10 years old for a screech owl?
It's pretty old. I think they can live to around 13 or 14 in captivity. In the wild, average is more like 8. So she's pretty old. Did we have any others?
I am waiting to see if we have any other questions. Will you tell us how, are they something that you could see in your yard?
Yes, but they aren't seen too often because they are nocturnal. They aren't as common in urban areas as some owls, but you can see them sometimes.
Awesome. If we have any other questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll do a nice close-up of Artemis here, so you can see her even closer. Is she a baby?
She is not. She is fully grown. But fully grown, they're just around 1/3 of a pound for the small owls.
Awesome. All right.
We'll say goodbye to Artemis.
All right. Goodbye, Artemis. Thank you. All right. We are now on to myth number 2. And this myth is owls are a bad omen. How did we go from thinking that owls were wise and were the messengers of the gods to something that is spooky and scary and maybe even bad luck? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back in history again. But this time, instead of ancient Greece, we are going to go to the Middle Ages in Europe. And we're going to meet another powerful female figure. And this time, it's not a goddess who's beautiful and worshipped by people. It's a scary, spooky witch. This is another powerful woman, but she's not someone that people liked. In medieval Europe, witches were really bad news. People believed they were real. Today, of course, we know that witches aren't real. They don't have any magical powers. But back in these times, people had a lot of things that happened that they couldn't explain. And one of the people they like to blame those unexplained things like bad luck or a drought or their crop failing on were witches. And you can see in these pictures, these are old pictures from a book that was actually a handbook on how to capture witches, that all the people that are depicted as witches in here are old women. They're not very pretty. They don't look like very nice ladies. And they're all surrounded by animals. So one of the ways that people believed that witches got their powers were from their familiars, which were animal companions. And if you look at the animals in these drawings, we have some crows, we have what looks like it might be a dog, there's a cat, a rabbit, a little lizard. I don't know what the thing that has the bull horns is, some kind of animal. But most of these look like normal animals, right? So if you lived in a village where there was an old lady who was kind of mean, or maybe she was really rich and she didn't share with you very often, or maybe she was just kind of strange and she happened to hang out with animals a lot, accusing her of being a witch was a really great way to get rid of her. And during this time, witches people who were accused of being witches, did not have a good time of it. They were persecuted and sometimes they were even killed, even though they were innocent and didn't practice any magical powers. The animal familiars that witches were associated with were animals that came out at night. Witchcraft was something you had to hide and do in the dark and keep secret. So most animals that were considered familiars for witches were nocturnal. They came out at night. So bats, cats, toads, and of course, owls were really common for people to accuse of being witches' familiars. And owls kind of took on this spooky persona, and they were portrayed in paintings and artwork in ways that made them seem kind of sinister and dark. In fact, some people noticed, you can see the drawing on the right, there's this owl and there's some other birds flying around kind of pecking at it. People noticed that sometimes daytime birds would attack owls, and they thought it was because these wholesome daytime birds were trying to drive out the evil owl. Well, they were kind of right, because those birds were trying to make the owl leave because the owl is a predator, and they might have had nests nearby, and they don't want this owl eating their babies. So that still happens all the time. We see that today. In fact, one of the reasons owls have camouflage isn't just to help them hunt and sneak up on their prey, but also so that they can sleep and be undisturbed during the day by other birds that might come in and try and chase them off. So that behavior in those days, they tried to explain it with sort of a mystical or magical meaning, but in reality it was just nature. It was just animals trying to protect their young from a predator. Now, fortunately for the women accused of being witches and for owls, people's attitudes started to change. Over time, we realized that witches weren't real, that owls were just cool predators, cool animals, not something that we needed to harm or persecute. And they started to become associated with Halloween. And so we start to see them sort of their images changing. Now it's kind of a fun, spooky, scary, rather than, a dark or evil kind of scary. So we see owls a lot at Halloween time. And again, it kind of goes back to the idea that owls are nocturnal. They come out at night. So at nighttime is when the ghosts and the ghouls come. But even that is a little bit of a myth, because not all owl species are nocturnal. They don't all come out at night. In fact, there are plenty of owl species that are active during the day. So here I have some examples of owls that you commonly see out in the daytime. So on the very far left, we have a hawk owl. These guys like to eat little songbirds and voles, which are more commonly out in the day. So they have to be active at the daytime because that's when their food is out. The same is true of the owl in the middle. This is a pygmy owl. They oftentimes are seen out in the day hunting their favorite prey. Some owls, if they're active during the day, it might be seasonal. So in the top right corner, you can see a snowy owl. And if you're a Harry Potter fan, you know this owl. You've seen her in the movies or read about her in the books. This is the same kind of owl that Hedwig is. She doesn't actually deliver mail. I'm sorry to say, that's another myth I have to bust. There's no owl postal workers. But in the wintertime, snowy owls live where it's very, very cold. It's part of why they get their name. And it's just a lot more convenient and comfortable to hunt in the daytime when it's not so cold. So you can often find them out being active in the day in the wintertime. The little guy in the bottom right corner is a burrowing owl. And these guys are kind of the crazy rule breakers of the owl world. They don't live in a tree. They live underground in a hole. They are active all different times. Sometimes they're up at night. Sometimes they're up in the day. Sometimes they're up in the morning. Sometimes they're up in the evening. They'll kind of just go out whenever they get hungry, and they kind of trade between napping and hunting. So they are another owl that you'll commonly see in the daytime. And they're actually pretty fun and cute to watch. So I recommend you try and find some burrowing owls sometime. Now we have a raptor ambassador owl who is also an owl that isn't always active at night. So we've talked about nocturnal is an animal that's up at nighttime and active at nighttime. Animals that are active in the daytime are diurnal, so they're out in the day. And then we have a new word for you, it's crepuscular. So if we have a nighttime active animal and a daytime active animal, what do you think crepuscular means? I'm going to let you think about that for 2 seconds. Crepuscular is active during the very early morning and the very late evening. So when the light is just between daytime and nighttime, that's when these owls are most active. And this owl is named Galileo, and he is named after a famous Italian astronomer, Galileo Galilei. And he was the father of modern astronomy. He spent lots of time looking through a telescope at things in the heavens. So he looked at the sun, at the moon, at the stars, and kind of figured out how they moved around each other. So we thought someone who spent that much time gazing at the night sky would be a great person to name one of our owls after. So let's meet Galileo, learn his story and about his species of owl.
Well, hello everyone. So this is Galileo, and Galileo his scientific name is Aegioflammeus. And that first name, Aegio, is actually a group of owls that all have a characteristic of ears, so they're called eared owls. And you can't see it on Mr. Galileo right now, but he actually has these little tiny ears that come up sometimes. Now they're not actually ears, they're just little feathers, but because of this, he has the name of a short-eared owl. So his ears aren't long like some owls may have. They're a little bit shorter, which gives him his name. He is not called a Galileo owl as much as that name might be attractive. So owls, like I mentioned, those little tufts aren't actually ears. They actually have two little holes on the side of their heads, kind of like, we have holes on the sides of our heads too. But we have these little skin bits too. He just has plain holes. And those holes give him the really sharp hearing that help him locate his prey. Now when he's hunting, these two holes are actually slightly off. So one might be a little higher than the other on his head. One might be like right here, the other one might be a little higher. And this is actually very helpful for Mr. Galileo, because when he's hunting, he needs to be able to narrow down exactly where his prey is. And if they were the same, that gives him good hearing, but having them slightly different, he's actually able to turn his head to figure out exactly where it is. It's almost like a honing device, which is really helpful for him in accurately hunting his prey. Now, Avery earlier pointed out something really interesting about Owl's feet, and he doesn't like me pointing to his feet, but he has little feathers on his feet. And these feathers, in addition to keeping them a little warmer in the winter, they also help them fly silently. So if they didn't have these feathers on their feet, it would actually make it so that as they're flying, the wind that's coming by them would make a little bit more of a whooshing sound. And so these feathers help to dull that noise and further help them fly silently, which is pretty great. That's a really cool adaptation that Galileo has. Owls are in a family of birds that are called zygodactyl. Try to say that word, zygodactyl. It's a little bit of a funny vocabulary word. And this means that their feet, they have 2 toes in front and 2 toes in back. Maybe he'll let me show you. You can kind of see his 2 toes in back over here. And that's very interesting. He's trying to crawl up my arm. Oh, Mr. Galileo. Sorry about that. Those 2 feet, those 2 toes in front and 2 toes in back actually help him grip his prey a little bit better. So a lot of birds just have 1 toe behind, and having 2, if he's hunting something that might really not want to be eaten for dinner, it might try to get out of his grasp, and having 2 toes really helps him grip it when he's hunting for dinner. So that's pretty interesting. Now, if this guy's such a good hunter, you might be asking why we have him. Well, Galileo, when he was a little bit younger, got caught in a fence. And because of that, he was taken in by some very kind people that brought him to a rehabilitation center. And they tried to nurse him back to health so that he could be re-released into the wild. However, he did not really pick up on his normal owl traits after being in the rehabilitation center. And because of that, he can't be re-released because he wouldn't be very good at being an owl. Now, this happens to owls sometimes who live in close proximity to humans. When they live so close to us, it's very difficult for them to not encounter us and sometimes get injured by the structures that we build. And Galileo in particular, he is what's called a diurnal owl, like Melissa was talking about. He hunts during the day, so that means he has an even higher likelihood of encountering people in his day-to-day hunting activities. Some interesting things about the way he hunts, actually, is he tends to hunt a little bit closer to the ground. So he is not an owl that likes to soar like you might see some of the hawks or vultures soaring really high up in the sky. He will hunt a little bit closer to the ground. And he also tends to like to nest on the ground. Oh, he did a little thing that's called a ruse. That will help him kind of fluff out his feathers and straighten everything out. So anyway, about him hunting, he both hunts a little bit closer to the ground than other birds, and he also nests a little bit closer to the ground than other birds, which is a pretty interesting characteristic of short-eared owls that may not be common. You might not think of birds hunting and living on the ground as much. His main source of food that he likes to hunt is little mice and little voles. So he is not a vegetarian bird. He definitely likes his meat. But he hunts smaller things because he's a little bit of a small owl. He's actually full grown, just like Artemis. And similar to Artemis, he would live around 14 or 15 years in our care. So this little guy, in terms of his habitat, you may actually see him around. He does tend to live, he lives in North America, and you can actually find them in every continent except for Australia and Antarctica, which is pretty cool. These guys like to live everywhere. So you are likely to see someone like Galileo around in the world. So, are there any questions?
Yes. Do we know how old Galileo is?
We don't know exactly. We got Galileo in 2016 about. And when we got him, he had all of his adult feathers. So adult birds have different feathers than young birds do. And once they have their adult feathers, it's a little hard for us to guess how old he might be. But we think he might be around 7.
Okay, we have one more question. If they make their nests on the ground, how do they protect their babies?
So they have a really interesting adaptation for protecting their babies. You can first see that he's a nice color, so he tends to blend into things on the ground a little bit more, like sagebrush and things like that, which is where he likes to live. But he also, female owls, Galileo is a male, female short-eared owls, if there is a predator that's maybe getting a little too close to the nest, they will go further away from the nest and actually look injured to draw that predator away so that they don't get so close to the nest and don't see their babies. And that's a pretty interesting adaptation that they've made to protect their nest, since they're a little bit more vulnerable being on the ground.
Awesome. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Tessa and Galileo. All right. Well, we have one more myth for you today, and this is kind of a modern myth. This is something that I get asked almost every time I go out on a program. And it doesn't matter what kind of raptor I have with me, if it's a hawk or an owl or an eagle or a falcon, people want to know, is it dangerous? Is it going to hurt me? And I get that. They have some impressive features for hunting that look kind of scary and dangerous. So do we think owls are dangerous for people? Well, you know, something that people usually picture when they think of a raptor being dangerous is a scenario like this, that there's a little baby maybe playing in the backyard and a raptor comes down and swoops down and carries it off into the trees. Well, first of all, I have to tell you right now, this is not a real picture. This could not happen. This bird in the picture is a barred owl, and he, on average, the largest barred owls hardly ever weigh more than 2 pounds. And the average human baby weighs about 7 pounds. That's a newborn. So even the smallest newborn baby is way too big for an owl to swoop down and carry off. And that's pretty much true for all species of raptors. There aren't really any documented cases of raptors capturing humans to eat or prey on them. So right now I'm going to bust this myth. These guys don't really pose any danger to us as far as wanting to eat us or feed us to their babies. That's just not going to happen. We're way too big and threatening for them to want to do that. However, owls can be dangerous depending on who or what you are. So one of the things that makes owls raptors are their talons, these big claws on the ends of their feet. This is a Eurasian eagle owl. It's one of the biggest species of owls. And if you look at those feet, those are some really impressive talons that it's got. They're long, they're curved, they're sharp, and they're meant to capture prey. Now, owls, for their size, also have really strong grip strength. So they can clamp down with those feet really hard. In fact, their preferred method for killing their prey is to squeeze down and either cause it to suffocate or to break a bone, like a neck or a spine, that will keep that animal from getting away and will kill it. So they have really, really strong feet. Now, do we need to be worried about it? Once again, it kind of depends on what you are. If you are a prey species of an owl, then owls are very dangerous to you. So I want to talk about one of the most common owls we have here in North America, the great horned owl. One of the things that makes this owl so successful and so common and able to be seen all over the place is that it will eat a lot of different things. Anything as small as a mouse, like you see in the picture to the left, or a little snake, up to things as large as a rabbit. And in fact, if you look in the bottom right picture, this is one of the few animals in the world that will capture and eat skunks. They don't have a very good sense of smell, so the skunk's defense doesn't mean much to a great horned owl. So they will capture and kill some pretty big animals, considering that this is a bird that weighs maybe 3 or 4 pounds. Now, in the top right picture, we have an interesting story behind this one. It looks like this owl is attacking a cat. It's not a real cat. This is a little robot cat. And it was part of a study where there was a neighborhood where some cats were starting to disappear. And people were wondering what was causing the problem. So they put out an infrared camera trap and this little robo-cat to see what came around and came after it. And lo and behold, here's a great horned owl coming after the cat. Now, I'm happy to report the robot cat was found safe and unharmed a few feet away from where the owl picked it up and carried it off. I think the owl needed only one bite to realize it wasn't real food. So what does this mean? Does this mean that an owl could potentially be dangerous to your pets? Well, the answer is it's possible. If you have a cat and you let it outside, it's always a possibility that a predator is going to see it as a source of food. And that could include owls. But the reality is that cat is far more likely to cause a problem for a baby owl that it might eat or other bird species that it might eat than it would for the owl to cause a problem to the cat. So really, it's best for the owls and the cats to keep your cats inside. And if you do have little dogs that you let out at night, just go out with them while they go to the bathroom and make sure that they're safe. So it is possible for an owl to attack a pet. What about people? We already established that owls don't eat people. There's no way that they would see us as prey. But would they attack a human? Well, there are a few cases of owls having attacked people. But usually, in almost all of those cases, it's one of two reasons. Either the person got too close to a wild animal and that animal felt it needed to defend itself, or a person, without realizing it, because owls are so quiet and have such good camouflage, approached an owl's nest where there were young and didn't know, and that owl might swoop down and dive at that person to kind of drive them away. So we do have a couple of incidences, but there's no documented cases of an owl killing a human, just some minor injuries. So, like with all wild animals, we just need to be careful. So are owls dangerous? They are if you're a prey animal. Otherwise, if you keep your distance, you should be safe. So we have one last owl ambassador to introduce you to today, and he is a great horned owl, like these ones we were talking about. His name is Katori. And I think one of the things you'll realize from Katori's story is if when we talk about if owls are dangerous, is that the reality is people pose a lot more problems for owls than owls do for people. But the other thing I want you to pay attention to with Katori's story is places where people also help. One of my favorite things to talk to people about is that we sometimes feel like people are the bad guys and the things that we do are only going to hurt wildlife. But in reality, people are the heroes too. I always tell people whenever there's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, like say an oil spill, look for the helpers. Who is out there helping and rescuing those animals? It's other humans. So we're really the only species that will take the time and make a sacrifice to help some species that's not our own. We'll go out of our way to rescue and help animals. So listen in Katori's story for places where humans maybe made some mistakes, but then humans also did a lot to help improve the situation. So I have my friend Leon here who's going to help us with Katori, and he will introduce you to this beautiful bird.
All right, so this is Katori, and he is a great horned owl, an owl that you have likely seen or heard if you've been outside, as his call is the common hoot. So he's also known as the hoot owl. And again, he's found all over the Americas, including North and South America, just about anywhere he could find a place to have a roost, including inside cities. He was actually found by people on a trail, and they thought, well, this owl is on the ground. He was a baby at the time and kind of looking a little confused probably because he's like, oh, I'm on the ground now. And so they picked him up and thought, well, if he's on the ground, he might be hurt. His mom might be gone. What can we do? And so they took him to a rehab facility. And at the rehab facility, they determined there was nothing wrong with him at the time. But while there, he ended up having an eye infection, which caused him to need medication to be given by people who, at this point, they are actually helping Katori out. But because he had to then have an interaction with people at this critical stage in his development, he became what is known as a human imprint. And since he's a human imprint, he didn't really get to learn all of the things that an owl would need to know to be an owl in nature, how to hunt, how to mate, how to select nests, and so on. So while very well-meaning to pick up a baby owl off the ground, it turns out his mother was probably somewhere nearby. And like people, when we try to learn a new task, we don't always get it right the first time. So learning to fly is a tough time for a bird, and they can have a couple accidents, or they might just get tired and end up on the ground. So if you find a bird on the ground, kind of let it be. It's probably all right, unless it obviously has an injury. So as I mentioned before, he is a great horned owl. He is a predator of just about anything that he can get his hands on that is a little bit smaller than him. And he's big, right? But he's a male, so he's the smaller of the two sexes. And the females are actually could be quite a bit bigger than he is. Let's see. What have we not mentioned about owls? I noticed some of our owls are turning their heads around, and you'll see that as he moves his head around, right? So he gets that excellent vision about 270 degrees around, not all the way around. He has more vertebrae in his neck than we do. But his most striking feature, which is up now, are his horns. Now, these aren't horns. There's no bone in them. They're not ears, as was stated with Galileo. They're actually just feather tufts. And feather tufts are his way of communicating with other owls that he might be mating with. But additionally, they break up his face. And so his face is kind of round, and round is not found too often in nature. Perfect circles don't exist. So it breaks up his face, but more importantly, it comes into looking scary. So this might actually help him look like a cat or some other mammal to potential predators to him. So while he is not actually super scary, he wants you to think that he is. Do you have any?
We have a question.
Sure.
Somebody wants to know if Katori can fly.
So Katori can actually fly. He is fully flighted. And when he flies, he's very quiet. But the reason, again, he couldn't be released is while he can fly, he has no obvious injuries. He just doesn't know how to be an owl. He doesn't think he's a person, but he also doesn't really know how to do those day-to-day owl tasks. And I know we have some feathers. If you
Yeah, we could do a demonstration.
Yeah.
So this is an audio demonstration. So I have, I'm going to stick it in here, an eagle feather. And I'm going to flap it, so we need to be really quiet and listen to the microphone and see if you can hear this feather flapping. So here we go. So that's the eagle feather. And then I have an owl feather here. So this is actually one of Katori's feathers. Do you recognize that? And we're going to flap that one just as hard and see if you can hear it. And you can see I'm shaking it as hard as the other one. And so that's the difference in the silent flight. So owls are able to fly silently. One more time. Eagle. Owl.
All right, so while we're talking about feathers, Katori has quite a few of them, including many layers, which allows him to stay in most places in North America year-round. But he might actually get hot, so he will change in elevation. So here in Utah, they'll move up and down the mountains in elevation just depending on the time of the year, and that's going to help keep him cool because he can't take off what essentially amounts to 3 down coats.
Okay, we have another. This is actually a great question.
Sure.
Do we feed him skunks?
I would feel really bad for the bird care team member that had to do that, but we do not. All of his food is actually pre-killed because he can't hunt, and his most of his diet consists of mice, just because that's one of the easiest things to feed him.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so thank you so much, Leon and Katori.
Yeah.
Well, we have busted and confirmed our 3 myths today. And Katori's story actually confirms or busts some other owl myths. Leon talked about, can owls turn their head all the way around? Well, no, of course not. Their head would pop off. But there's an old legend that if you walk in a circle around an owl, you can kill it by making it follow you with its head because it will break its neck. It's not true. Owls are not, we said they are not the smartest animals in the world, but they're not that dumb. Another great myth that Leon busted for us is the idea that if you find a bird on the ground, that you should pick it up and take it into a rescue. Sometimes that is the case, but birds, they have to learn how to fly, just like humans have to learn how to walk. So a lot of times if they have all their feathers and they're out on the ground, mom and dad are probably close by and are just waiting for you to leave so they can help that baby climb back up into the nest or up into the branches where it will be safe. If you find a little naked bird on the ground that has no feathers, that's pink, the best thing to do is to look for the nest and put it right back up in there. Remember, if an owl can eat a skunk, it's not going to have a great sense of smell. And that's the case for most birds. So they're not going to smell you and abandon their babies. So really the best parents for birds are birds. So that's a great myth that I'm glad we busted today too. Well, we have reached the end of our program. I hope if you continue to ask questions and bust your own myths about owls and other animals, and if you want to learn more about Katori or Galileo or Artemis or all of our raptor ambassadors or our education programs, you can head over to hawkwatch.org, and there's lots of information there. And I'm also including my contact information here. If you are a teacher and you'd like to know more about our education resources, you can email me, mhalverson@hawkwatch.org. We hope you had a great time with our owls today, and we hope to come and visit your classroom or your community with one of our raptor ambassadors soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.